Well, good evening. Good to see everybody. That I see we already have some. I see Cindy. Good to have you join us. I did see your YouTube comments, Cindy. So just and then I see the Hayneses. You guys, good to see. So tonight we're continuing our Bible study, looking at a call for New Testament Christianity, going back to the basic, idea of looking at the Bible, just looking outside of all the different things that we have developed around what the Bible is about. And this is really a great series, very simple. I like it. It's very similar to the one Saturday morning or Sunday morning that we're doing. And I think it's neat because tonight, actually, there's some overlap from last Sunday because in the Bible Study Without Borders, they're going over the Sermon on the Mount. And he actually, in this, looking at a Christ to follow. And because, we all are following something. So tonight, this video is focusing on what is it that we are following. We all are driven and we've got goals in our lives and things. And so I like the way he goes through, uses the Sermon on the Mount, but he doesn't dig in deep. He kind of does it. It shows the way Jesus is teaching, the Christ that we should be following versus a lot of the things that are really ruling our hearts and minds and what we're allowing to overwhelm us and take us away from the beauty of Christ and what we can gain in the blessings and being with him and following him versus all the other things that are there. So we're going to go and watch the video. So if you got some comments and you think about something, write it down. You can put it in right now on the chat, and then whenever we start the discussion, I'll go ahead and we'll address those. Karen, good. I see Karen joined us. So just in time, we'll get started with the video. And then, like I said, watch the video. Look for some thoughts, questions, so that when we come back, we've got enough time, we can have a good discussion. So let's go ahead and watch the video.
To God be the glory.
Have you ever played Simon Says, where you try to get someone to follow the leader? It's a fun game as a little kid, but it really is a great illustration of how life is lived. We're following what somebody says. We're being ruled. We're being led. The Bible indicates to us in Matthew chapter 5 through 7 that the choice is pretty simple. It's a choice between two things. I hope that you'll open up your Bible with me to Matthew 5 through 7 as we look at a call to New Testament Christianity, a Christ to follow. We are looking at a series of lessons entitled A Call to New Testament Christianity. In the last lesson, we saw that there is a concept for us to understand, the mystery, which is that the gospel is for all. Today, we're going to look further into this idea of a call to New Testament Christianity and see that there is a Christ to follow. Gregory Rasputin was a rowdy peasant, a horse thief, a drunkard, a seducer of young girls, and a general good-for-nothing. He was uneducated and illiterate. It's hard to find any redeeming quality in the man, though he was said to have brute physical strength. Life in Russia in 1905 was desperate and grim. He went to St. Petersburg, Russia, weaseled his way up the ranks of nobility, and eventually rose to become the most trusted advisor of Tsar Nicholas II, and especially of his superstitious wife, Alexandra. Many historians believe that in the fateful final years of the Romanov dynasty, Rasputin was the unofficial but undisputed ruler of Russia. He claimed to be a holy man and a prophet, but he was grossly immoral and unscrupulous. He had abandoned his own wife and children. The Tsar and his entire large family lost their lives in part because they gave Rasputin control of it. It's hard to believe that so much confidence was placed in one so undeserving of it. When Jesus gives the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5 through 7, he is very concerned about who people let rule their lives. The thesis of his sermon is in Matthew 5 and verse 20, that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the Scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Not unlike Rasputin, these religious elitists had inserted themselves into a position of spiritual authority. Over in Matthew 23 and verse 2, Jesus says the scribes and the Pharisees have seated themselves in the chair of Moses. Jesus is urging his disciples to make sure that they were making the proper choice of Lord over their lives. This was vital because of something that Jesus says in the heart of the sermon. No man can serve two masters, for he will either hate the one and love the other. He'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. Matthew 6:24. We're not surprised then that Jesus contrasts his authority with other things that people put in charge of their lives. They are the very things that we're tempted to let rule our lives today. And whenever they are measured objectively against Jesus, they fall hopelessly short of what he can give us. Who or what rules your life? Number one, is your life ruled by superficial religion? In Matthew chapter 5, verse 17 through 48, we see Jesus discussing this at length. After Jesus' masterful introduction, which we'll look at in a few moments, he makes a lengthy contrast. It's not merely a contrast between the old law and his teaching, even though it's fair to say that his way is superior even to that. Paul makes that contrast the heart of his letter to the Romans. Instead, Jesus is contrasting the religion that he came to offer with the religion that the scribes and the Pharisees offered. And this was serious business. Entering the kingdom of heaven was riding on making the right choice, verse 20. Jesus contrasts his teaching with theirs on several matters. Interpersonal conflict, verse 17 through 26. Sexual purity, in verse 27 through 30. Divorce, in verse 31 and 32. Integrity of speech, in verse 33 through 37. Revenge, in verse 38 through 42. And the treatment of enemies, verse 43 through 48. But there was a problem behind these contrasts, and that was their attitude towards Scripture. It was superficial. Superficial religion is more concerned with how you look and less concerned with how you think. You see this in every one of Jesus' examples. You'd better not murder, they would say, but say and feel however you want toward your brother and don't reconcile with him. You'd better not commit adultery, they say, but look and desire the object of your lust however you want. You'd better not seem too casual about marriage, the Pharisees and Scribes would say, but feel free to get rid of her if it doesn't make you happy and get out of the marriage. Every one of the examples are similar in this way. Jesus reaches past action and addresses motive. Superficial religion selects appearance over attitude. Unless we think that we're not capable of duplicating that today, consider some 21st century equivalents. What about intensely focusing on whether or not our worship is right, but ignoring indifference and apathy in our hearts toward God and each other as we worship? What about making sure that we're dressed up for church services, but having hearts full of envy and greed and hate? Whatever form it takes, it's about looking right to others, but not being right with God. Superficial religion is looking for the minimum and not the extra mile. There are churches that put up the numbers of their attendance in their foyers or in their auditoriums. If all of those were to go away, it wouldn't bother me. Sometimes we get obsessed with numbers, and they do not begin to tell the true story. Yes, they imply that some find Sunday morning more important than the other services, and that's sad. They possibly imply that some may not be giving sacrificially of their money, and if true, that's terrible. But those numbers tell us nothing about what kind of disciples, followers we are. Something that has gotten popular over the last few years, especially with millennials, is a minimalist lifestyle. It's about reducing debt and stress and possessions and space. There are tons of websites that talk about how to live with less. That kind of lifestyle might give us a better relationship with money, but some take a minimalist approach with God, reducing time, energy, money, emotion, and overall commitment to Him. We reinvest in travel and hobbies and work and other competition for discipleship. We step away from religious commitments that we used to do. But Jesus calls for hearts which are looking to do more for Him and His cause. Superficial religion is more concerned with how what we do affects us and not how it impacts others. Later in the sermon, Jesus sets forth what we call the golden rule. In Matthew 7 and verse 12, treat others the way you want to be treated. But this part of Jesus' sermon is giving the same principle in a different way. In Matthew 5, 1 through 2, the Beatitudes include unselfish acts like mercy and peacemaking. Matthew 5, 13 through 16, being salt and light is about influencing others. These 6 contrasts from verse 17 through 48 draw our attention to how our thoughts and attitudes toward others affect those relationships. Superficial religion is also not going to transform you or the people around you. Jesus gives wisdom to help our relationship with our brother, our spouse, our co-workers, our enemies, and our world. You follow the true righteousness that Jesus calls for in Matthew 5, 17 through 48, and you will be better, and all of those will be impacted. And the point of all of this is that there are a great many people who claim to be Christians, to be following Jesus, whose religion is skin deep. As Jesus later laments concerning these same folks, he says, "You hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men,'" Matthew 15, 7 through 9. We don't want to be ruled by superficial religion that we put on and take off with our Sunday best, that's more concerned with honoring traditions and rules that we have established than following Jesus with all of our hearts. We want to follow Jesus. There is a Christ to follow. How do we determine whether or not we're following him? Number 2, from this great Sermon on the Mount, is your life ruled by what other people think? Matthew chapter 6, verse 1 through 18. Remember, Jesus is concerned with his disciples being truly righteous. And from this point to the very end of the sermon, he brings up 6 areas of righteousness: giving, prayer, fasting, money, trust, and judging others. In Matthew 6, 1 through 18, the people that Jesus condemns are those who do what they do to be seen of men. Now keep in mind that this is not something that we can automatically know about somebody just by looking at them. In other words, it's not your job and my job to evaluate whether others are giving, praying, or fasting for show. In fact, he will condemn those who make such unrighteous judgments in the next chapter of Matthew. Jesus wants our works to be seen by men, Matthew 5:16, but he doesn't want that to be what drives us to do them. And so appearance-driven righteousness he addresses. Appearance-driven righteousness is done for the wrong reason. Verse 1, verse 2, verse 5, and verse 16. Verse 1 says it's to be noticed by men. Verse 2, to be honored by men. Verse 5, to be seen by men. And verse 16, to be noticed by men. Again, Jesus addresses this in Matthew 23 when he says in verse 5, they do all of their deeds to be seen by others. They make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long, and they love the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplaces and being called rabbi by others. And Paul tells Christians to choose sincerity and fearing the Lord over being people pleasers, Colossians 3:22. The problem is not practicing righteousness. It's not giving or prayer or fasting. Scripture repeatedly tells us how God loves and appreciates all of these things in their proper context done properly. But when what drives us to do something is being praised and recognized by men, we have chosen the wrong ruler. If we took the time to seriously consider this motivation, it makes no sense to be driven by what people think. People are fickle, hard to please, and not worthy of being given that kind of power and influence over us. They're not all-knowing. They didn't die for us, and they won't be our judge at the second coming like Jesus will be. You may remember Aesop's fable about the man and his son and the donkey who were on a journey. And no matter what they tried, somebody always had something to criticize. Whether the man rode and his son walked, or the son rode and the man walked, whether both of them rode the donkey or neither of them rode the donkey, or even if they carried the donkey. The point of the fable is, please all and you will please none. Appearance-driven righteousness also yields the wrong reward. Verse 1, verse 2, verse 5, and verse 16. Not only is it foolish to be ruled by what people think, whatever we get from that is inferior to what we could have. When we are driven by appearances and the praise and the attaboys of others, that's all the reward that we should expect. Repeatedly, Jesus says that being seen and noticed by men is their full reward, and it causes us to have no reward with our Father in heaven. Verse 1. Whatever I think it might do for my pride and my self-esteem and my self-worth for you to notice me is not worth losing my reward with God. Appearance-driven righteousness also ignores a valuable realization, verse 4, verse 6, and verse 18. It is easier to see people who we live among than the one that the New Testament writers called the invisible God, Colossians 1:15. But when our religion is ruled by the need for others to see our deeds, we fail to see that our Father sees. He sees in secret, and He will reward you. The all-powerful, all-knowing God is able to do far more abundantly beyond all that we ask or think, according to the power that's at work in us, Ephesians 3:20. Jesus says, "Fear not those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul, but rather fear Him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell." Let's not forget that the opposite is true. Serve the one who is able to give you eternal life and a home with Him. Who is the ruler of your life? Are you following Jesus? Well, Jesus gives us a third question to ask. Is your life ruled by worry over material things? Matthew 6:19 through 34. You know, Jesus spends more time on money than any other subject in this sermon of sermons. Doesn't that tell us that this is something that many of us struggle to have a healthy relationship with? Some see this section as dealing with two different subjects, money and worry. But the worry is about money. And so it seems to me that Jesus is dealing with two aspects of the same problem. In verse 19, He says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth." In verse 25, He says, "Do not worry about your life." The first section focuses more on how money may rule us. In verse 19, He indicates that enjoying material things on this earth may become our chief investment and our distraction. The Proverbs writer says, "Do not weary yourself to gain wealth. Cease from your consideration of it," Proverbs 23:4. When you set your eyes on it, it is gone. For wealth certainly makes itself wings like an eagle that flies toward the heavens, Proverbs 23:5. It's a losing battle, but it's one that most people remain embroiled in. Verse 21 indicates that money may be what our heart treasures more than it treasures heaven. God knows whether or not that's true of us because He knows our hearts, Luke 16:15. And then we also see in verse 22 and 23 that money may lead our lives into darkness. In 1 Timothy 6, Paul says, "Those who want to be rich fall into temptation and a snare and many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, and some by longing for it have wandered away from the faith and have pierced themselves through with many sorrows." 1 Timothy 6:9 and 10. Verse 24 of Matthew 6 indicates that money may be our greater love and may draw our greater loyalty. And if so, it is our master. In Dumfries in Galloway, Scotland, archaeologists found an ancient Viking pot full of treasures that date to the 8th or 9th century. They have been worn and decayed by time. It wasn't spent, it was buried and became useless. Paul says, "For we brought nothing into this world, and it's certain that we can carry nothing out of it either." 1 Timothy 6 and verse 7. How many are ruled by something that we cannot take with us? Ecclesiastes 5:15, Solomon says, "As he had come naked from his mother's womb, so he will return as he came. He will take nothing from the fruit of his labor that he can carry in his hand." Now, the second section of Matthew 6 that we're talking about focuses more on how worry may rule us and how sad a situation that is. Matthew 6:25 says that worry limits our view of life to money and the material. Matthew 6:26 through 29 tells us that worry lowers our value of our own lives. Verse 30 through 32, worry lessens our faith. And verse 34 indicates that worry leaves us vulnerable to the future. I like the little ditty that was written by Joe Petty in the book Apples of Gold. She said, worry never climbed a hill. Worry never paid a bill. Worry never dried a tear. Worry never calmed a fear. Worry never darned a hill. Worry never cooked a meal. Worry never led a horse to water. Worry never done a thing you'd think it oughta. Money is a great servant, but a horrible master. But it is Lord over the majority of mankind, and we're not exempt from the temptation. Someone has said, it's ironic that we print "In God We Trust" on the back of God's leading competitor. Is that what rules your life? You see, the idea is that Jesus is the one that we must follow, but if we're not following Jesus, we're following something else. Now, we can know this objectively if we ask the questions that we are led to ask in this greatest sermon ever preached in Matthew 5 through 7. There's a fourth question to ask to determine this. Is your life ruled by hypercriticism? Matthew chapter 7, verse 1 through 6. I heard about a woman who walked into a bank to open a new account. As she sat across from the banker and she saw his name, she began to muse that she went to high school with a boy who had the same name. But this man looked bald and wrinkled and much too old to have been a classmate. She wondered if it might be the father of that boy. And so she asked if his son attended high school locally. He said, "No, ma'am, but I did. Valley High, class of 63. She said, "Really? But I was at Valley High in 63. The banker replied, "You were? I thought you looked familiar. What subject did you teach?" Isn't it funny how we tend to look at ourselves less realistically and critically than we look at others? Dr. Denny Petrillo has pointed out that structurally, Jesus ends this sermon with a series of 7 twos. 2 evil listeners, verse 6. 2 fathers, verse 7 through 12. 2 ways, verse 13 and 14. 2 teachers, verse 15 through 19. 2 trees, verse 15 through 20. 2 types of followers, verse 21 through 23. And 2 builders, verse 24 through 27. As Jesus moves to a new point in Matthew 7, 1 through 6, he speaks of the person who is consumed by unrighteous judgment. Now, Jesus is not forbidding all judging of others. Even in this paragraph, he assumes that we will have to judge who is and who isn't swine and dogs, verse 6. But Jesus condemns a judging that uses 2 different measuring sticks, one for self and one for a brother. Jesus condemns a judging that wants to correct others, but does not want to correct self. It is possible to be ruled and dominated by a spirit of hypercriticism. We may appoint ourselves the belittlers of other followers of Jesus, the policeman of the preacher, the Simon Cowell of the song leaders, and the expert exposers of the elders and other leaders. In fact, we do it in all of our relationships. We do it at home, at work, and everywhere. When I was a boy growing up in the 70s, The Muppet Show was one of my favorite shows. Statler and Waldorf are probably my favorite characters. They sat up there in the balcony week after week. They were heckling and criticizing the jokes of the performance that was going on. And the talent was always terrible, and yet they kept returning for the next show. They thought each other to be very witty and laughed at each other. They hyperbolized curmudgeon-y, cranky, critical people that all of us have known. It was such an intentional exaggeration that it was funny. But it's not funny in the life of the church or for anyone who has to live with a hypercritical person. Such a person has to be miserable because they are constantly feeding on the negative and they're thinking the worst. That is, concerning everybody but themselves. About a decade ago, Dick Meyer wrote the book, Why We Hate Us. He uses the term selfism, which he defines as American individualism, redefined by the age of marketing, self-help, moral relativism, and the belief that the self is something that can be deliberately found or made. He ties this hyperemphasis on self to a growing belligerence in society. He writes, on the internet, belligerents can be anonymous, faceless, and therefore risk-free. In schools and offices, for example, the web is a problem because parents and workers say nasty things in email that they would never say in person. Chat rooms, blogs, and online comments are clogged with vitriol and hate-mongering. The need to make others wrong has turned into an addiction. The elevation of self comes by stepping on and insulting and ridiculing others. It is an ever-growing game of king of the mountain, but it is an unsatisfactory master. Now, as we look at the greatest sermon ever preached, Jesus is really driving home a point. Jesus is driving home the point that something is going to rule our life, or someone. It may be something that we see around us. It may even be ourselves, but Jesus wants it to be himself. He wants us to follow him. When Jesus teaches discipleship in passages like Luke 9:23 through 26, he says there, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever will save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what shall a man be profited if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul, or loses and forfeits himself? For the Son of Man will come in his glory with the glory of the Father and the holy angels, and he'll reward every man according to his deeds. Jesus wants us to follow him. Now, I want to categorize these illegitimate rulers in Matthew 5 through 7 for just a moment. Number one, there's the person ruled by appearances. Number two, there is the person ruled by the praise of others. Number three, there is the person who is ruled by money and worry. And number four, there is the person who is ruled by a critical spirit. Every one of these possessed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. You remember what Jesus said in Matthew 5:18 through 20? Unless our righteousness exceeds their righteousness, we will in no wise enter into the kingdom of heaven. You know, there is a special place in the cells of your body where oxygen is supposed to sit. It's like a little slot that, chemically speaking, is shaped just perfectly to hold that atom of oxygen. The problem is that carbon monoxide is shaped almost identically to oxygen, so that it fits perfectly in that slot where only oxygen should go. And when it starts to go there in mass quantities, your body starts to suffocate. However, you don't realize that this is happening. You think that you're fine. After all, you're breathing. Your lungs are still expanding and contracting, and you feel air coming in and going out. Your body is going through all the motions that it should be going through. All systems are normal, right? Wrong. You're actually being asphyxiated. You are suffocating even though you don't know it. Isn't that how it can be? When we think perhaps that we're following one ruler and we're really not. It really comes down to a contrast of two choices: rock and sand, obedience to Christ or obedience to self or man, wisdom or foolishness, falling or not falling. Matthew chapter 7, verse 24 through 27. The wise man lets Jesus rule his life. Throughout this sermon, Jesus offers true righteousness, but it requires making him master. We might call it a to-do list. Do incorporate these God-approved qualities, the Beatitudes, Matthew 5, 1 through 12. Do exert positive influence for Christ, Matthew 5, 13 through 16. Do pray the way he says, Matthew 6, 9 through 13. Do seek the kingdom first, Matthew 6, 33. Do look to God for what you need, Matthew 7, 7 through 11. Do walk the straight and narrow way, Matthew 7, 13 and 14. Do the will of the Father in heaven, Matthew 7, 21 through 23. And do follow what Jesus says, Matthew 7, 24 and 25. Jesus says, I say unto you 14 times in this sermon. He repeatedly stresses the kingdom of heaven in this sermon, letting him reign and rule our lives. Make no mistake about it. All of us have a master. Who is my master? Simply, it is the one that I serve. Service is visible and measurable. You can measure it with my checkbook and you can measure it with my clock. Jesus says, I want to be the ruler of your life. Friends, it is up to us to recognize that we're following someone or something. Jesus says, let's make sure that it's him.
All right. Well, if you've got some comments, you want to go ahead and jump in. We're going to go over, kind of discuss some comments that you have, looking at the different perspectives of things that rule our lives, things that we're being ruled by. The first one, superficial religion. So so if you're out there, jump in, give some comments, and we'll discuss, and whenever if you want to add, we'll stop, we'll bring it up and discuss what you want to add to the class. I think the first one was the conflict between what they were teaching versus what they were really doing. And that gave that level of superficialness where you're teaching, the idea out loud about controlling yourself and violence, sexual immorality, and those things, but yet inside it's okay. It's the external presentation that we're trying to fake people, and it's appearance over attitude. We see that a lot. So I like what he also said about, it's the minimum. We're not looking to try to give as much as we want. We're actually looking at with a minimum that we can get away with when it comes to superficial religion. And I think a lot of people are struggling with believing that they're really spiritual people, but they don't really understand the depth in which they need to transform inside. And that's far more important. And that's the sad part is, people who are sincerely seeking, they see that. They will see right through you. They will see that, and they'll know right away that that person, it's more superficial. There's something about them. Not that they're perfect, We're not talking about perfection, but there's got to be the genuineness inside and outside as well. This minimalist lifestyle that he was talking about, I thought was a good analogy today when we consider people that looking at, I don't know that many people who are actually living a minimalist lifestyle. Gluttony seems to be the other direction of wanting more and more, but I understand what he's kind of talking about when it looks at that, and in the way that some people think that minimalistically they can get away with that. Aline said, many think ritual is what is important. And that, I think that from the dawn of age, the beginning of time, we've always thought that somehow that a ritual, a ceremony, was something that what God was wanting. And as long as we went through the Acts, and even the Hebrews thought, well, as long as I participate in all the feasts, as long as I, offer sacrifice, take them up to the temple, pay my tithe, then I'm fine. But we know that they weren't fine. And but why is it that ritual seems to satisfy? I'm just thinking out loud. I'm like, what is it about ritual that makes us feel that that's okay?
Probably something to do with routine.
Routine?
Yeah, like it's so easy. God heard it, but as you said, the rituals, like there's plenty of times where he's like, don't give me your rituals. Like there's no heart in it. There's no heart in it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to have your sacrifices. You're repeating yourselves over and over as Jesus teaches us how to pray. Says don't do it like they do. There's no heart in it. It's like yada yada yada. Okay, here it is today. Ugh, that was done and over with. Now I want to go party.
I think that as well. I think I see it in our church services. That some people, if they're not careful, it's become a ritual. And over the years, when sounds bad, but you listen to some men pray, and it's always almost exactly the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Public prayer, when they go, and I understand there's some nerves there, and there's some of that, but when it's identical, it makes me kind of wonder. I'm gonna maybe embarrass Gene, but I remember growing up or listening to Gene when I moved here, and listening to him pray. He would take a sigh. He would sigh like that, and I knew he was sincerely thinking
Yeah.
about what he's talking and praying about. And I thought, that to me was so genuine. I don't know, maybe Gene, you got a medical thing where you're sighing, but I mean, it just really did show me that it was something so important, that it's got to be not a ritual. We know he taught very clearly there's ritual sacrifices, and the way they go through them, and we can see that when it comes to more of a ceremonial things of old law. But I think we got to bring it home and think about, have we made church something ritualistic? Oh, okay, we have somebody here.
Got two.
Yeah, I don't know who it is. It's a new person, Sin and Dave. They say, this is Paul, by the way. Oh.
Oh, Syndrave? Syndrav. Hi, babe.
Okay, Paul. I mean, you had a little cryptic little username there. Okay. All right, Paul. Thank you. Your wife says hi, by the way. It says, I've always thought that people move toward ritual because it feels special. God must also think it's special. It's an easy way to assume you must be making him proud. Yeah. And I mean, there's certain things we do traditional that's okay. I mean, we need that. We need some organization. Here, I know, like, it's been about 10, 15 years ago, we changed the order of services and a few things like that. Not to just upset people, but we added songs. We changed, like, when we do our prayer and stuff, and it was very weird to go from the way we used to do it all the time to the new format. And yet there's nothing unscriptural about it, but we were so comfortable with it, it made me think that it almost maybe became ritualistic. But I want to get a little more personal, because I think that I'm worried about people coming to church and they're seeking God, but unfortunately they're becoming settled with a ritual and not engaging spiritually the way they should, and feeling that, instead of just that, we're going to have somebody get up and read a scripture, lead a prayer. We're going to have the song leader come up. He's going to lead some songs. Then we're going to have the Lord's Supper. We're going to have another song. Then Ron's going to get up and he's going to preach a lesson. And then Ron's going to shut up. And then somebody's going to get up and lead a song. And then we'll have announcements. And then and it's just like, that's dreary. I mean, it becomes, and I know sometimes when I have not felt good, it's become dreary. I feel it. When I'm not feeling good and I'm sitting there and I'm sick and sitting there trying to go through worship, I felt that I checked out. And it became arduous. It was just difficult. It was like, okay, I'm here.
It almost, in a way, sounds like a business, almost. Like, it reminds me of those art pictures where people are just going to work with their suitcase and stuff, and then they just fall in line. Like, people want to come to the church and have a conversation and get personal, but then you got to be careful being a ritualistic church, because then those people will either leave or just fall right in line with their, like, suitcase and briefcase, or suitcase and suits to the church kind of concept. And then it's like, I keep getting this picture of, like, the stamps. Like, at the end of the day, church is a stamp on the paper that goes, all right, signed, we did it, our duty's done.
Yeah, you just checked it.
That's why people check out of the churches, or just don't, or they try and then they go, you know what, like, this isn't for me, because it's not, you gotta also be careful, because you don't want to go based by feelings, because then you get, like, radical. But they want that personal relationship, and they want to be around the people that have it. And so when they walk into just a cookie cutter church doing the same thing over again, they go, is this it?
Yeah, and I think one of the points I liked about looking at it, possibly if you're being ruled by a superficial religion, superficial faith, that you're not being transformed.
Well,
you're the same. You haven't changed. And the other part I like is, are people around you being transformed because of your being changed? Because it does change the people around you as well.
I feel like John talks about it a lot too. in John 8:34 to 47,
Mm-hmm.
he talks about how, so it's kind of like he's telling the Pharisees, your father from Abraham, and they're like, well, we're from Abraham, blah, blah. It's like even Abraham would say you're not following the law, and Moses, like, is going to tell you you haven't been following the law, but you look like you have,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not, or else you would know me plainly. And so it's like now put it today, and have Jesus talk to the Christians, like, you look like a Christian, you do all these flattering things, and give, like, basically just put in the false Christian for where he was talking about Abraham descendants, and we almost are falling in the same trap that they have, or some of us,
I think that's why it's a good point to self-evaluate. The other part that he brought up about it was superficial religion is more concerned about how much we are affected, not what others. We're more about what we're getting out of it, and I see that, unfortunately, where some people are more concerned about hearing, making sure the sermon tickles their fancy, or the singing was really good, or certain things like that, instead of coming to worship or being a part of a Christian, saying, what am I giving? What am I contributing?
Yeah.
What am I bringing? It's more about me again. Let's go to the next one. And Cindy, she said, self-driven righteousness done for the wrong reason. That's a good point. So number 2 was ruled by what others think about us. Doing, in other words, things that are for appearance to be seen by others. And
seeking validation.
Validation. We're doing what people think. And that's dangerous, because to me, I see that as people not thinking on their own.
Yeah.
Not, they're letting other people, they're driving, they see, I think of Ananias and Sapphira with Barnabas, when Barnabas gave the piece of property and brought it to the apostles, and they saw, oh, look what they did. Look what he got. He got this great, attention. So they were doing it for that purpose, was to try to get that attention, because based on what others, not that it was the right thing to do, but it was more of something else. And so I think that kind of ties with the last thing where I was saying about where we're more concerned about what do we get out of it versus what everybody else is getting out of it. Ananias and Sapphira, they were more, what am I going to get out of it? Good job. You and Ananias, you guys are righteous. You're really good. Versus, what is the purpose of me bringing this money to help? It's to help saints. That's what the purpose was, for others. I think they kind of do link together, and doing it to be seen by others as well. And I think that's important too, is that we're pleasing others is more important than pleasing God. That's something. And understanding, I think another point I liked, he says that it ignores the valuable realization that God is seeing, and that's who we're trying to please. We miss that point. That's what it's about. It's about pleasing God, and that what we're doing, it glorifies Him. Because, like we were looking at Sunday morning, was that, in that Bible class, was that we're really robbing God's glory by making it about us.
Yeah, I was just going to say it linked well with that study.
Yeah. So we need to have that understanding as well. The third, which I think everybody struggles with, is that, are we being ruled by the worry about material things? And this one I think is very personal for everyone, because all of us live in a world that requires money. You have to have money. You have to pay your bills. You have to buy food. You have to live, exist. Otherwise, we'd be homeless. We know what that's like. We've seen that. We understand that. But how much does that rule us? I think that's the issue. And I like the way he also pointed out that it's not just worry. It's also, he links it monetarily. So there is an aspect of that. I think they're both equal. I think it shows our struggle with faith, whenever we start worrying so much and it starts to affect us emotionally. I mean, be concerned and you can worry. I mean, be concerned. But when it becomes to the point where it's robbing us of our joy in God because we're so consumed with looking at the bills versus looking at our Bible, looking at our bank statement versus looking at the Bible.
Or looking at other people's success.
And getting more joy when you get a check that pays those bills than more joy than your Bible. Mm-hmm. That you might be having a problem, struggling with that. And that's something that happens. And it's almost become a cliche, but it's so true. We came into this world with nothing. We're going to leave with nothing. For some reason, in between, we feel like that the only way we can have a successful, valued life is that we accomplish and we have these things in which we can pass on. And there are so many lessons about, even the fool who built the barn and said, I'm going to build bigger barns. And the Lord said, you're not going to make it through the night. And then where's it all going to go? I thought of a joke about something like this. And it was about a man who was very wealthy, and on his deathbed, he had his servants bringing bags of gold to his deathbed. And his servant goes, you can't take that with you. And he goes, well, I'm going to try. So he dies and he goes to the pearly gates. Now, this is all a joke, okay? So I'm not saying that there's really pearly gates and stuff. But he goes to the pearly gates, and St. Peter meets him there. And he says, the angel comes and gets him and says, time to go. And he goes, well, I'm going to take these bags of gold. And the angel goes, no, you can't take that. And he goes, well, come on. He goes, St. Peter ain't going to let you in. You're not bringing anything. You came into the world with nothing, you're going to leave with nothing. Well, let me take them. Okay, fine. So he gets to the gates. St. Peter comes out, and he goes, can I bring these in? He goes, well, what do you got? And he looked down in the bag, and he started laughing. He goes, hey, guys, come here. Look, he brought asphalt. Gold. That's what the roads are made out of, right? In heaven. It's like, hey, guys, come and look at this. Look what he brought. He brought asphalt for heaven. It's funny, but it's almost like that. It's like we're working for the asphalt. We're trying to accumulate this stuff, but yet what we have waiting for us, why would you want to take anything with you? Why would you allow those things to diminish the value of what we have promised with God? But it's a struggle, and I think the only way is to refocus when we're in those challenging moments, to think about, you trust that God is taking care of you. And if you really look close, He has. And that's why I use that analogy that I know in my own life. It's been a life living by my faith by the rearview mirror. I seem to look in the rearview mirror and go, yep, look, there it is. Yep, He did this. He took care of me here. But in the moment, while I'm worrying and I'm faced with those struggles, I struggle. We struggle, don't we? But I'm learning. I'm getting better. Through the years, I've gotten a lot better. And I'll tell you what, I'm a lot happier. I still worry. I still things that, bills and, debt and things, and you look at it and but now, I know it's there. But I'm still being fed, I'm being clothed, I'm being blessed. And I still don't know all the solutions, but it sure makes your life happier and more blessed and released of that anxiety. And just literally put it in the Lord's hands. So, hypercritical criticism. That's an interesting one because, man, I hear this from people who won't go to church anymore. I've seen Christians do it as well. And we're talking about the idea of judging and putting a standard on others. Yet we look at ourselves and we don't understand that we're probably just as guilty. Now, I don't know if you got that story. Basically, if you're older and you've met one of your previous high school, especially my age, I know what he's talking about. I get on Facebook, and all of a sudden I see these high school girls and my friend boys that I knew in high school, and that image is still there. And I don't see that I'm just as old and bald and fat. And when I see them on Facebook, I'm shocked. I look at them and I go, man, they look old. And then I remember this exactly the way he said that story. It was almost like, man, they look really old. And then one time I thought, oh, I bet I look the same way. You know, it's like, but it's so easy, isn't it? It's so easy to look at somebody else and bring a judgment on them, to impose something on them in which we don't realize that we're not imposing on ourselves. In Matthew 7:1, when he talks about, you know, being careful about the way in which you judge and what you judge, by that standard is going to come back and it's going to come on you. And like he said, it doesn't mean we don't judge. In verse 6 of 7, he says, you know, don't cast your pearls before swine. That's a judgment when he gets into that. But how harsh are we on each other as Christians, too, sometimes, in imposing our beliefs on others and then not realizing that we're failing. It's humility, I think. That's the thing about it. It's a lack of humility.
That's why I wrote down too.
And oh man, you know, when he talked about the internet and all, you know, what's going on, we look at Twitter, Snapchat, all the different social methods. It's just so ugly and so easy to be ugly. It's so, the anonymity that you can just say things, and you see those things, and it's like, so you're telling me you've never been like that. This reminds me of the road rage when somebody gets so mad because somebody pulled out in front of them, and then they act as if they've never done it themselves. And then with this anger and stepping on others, not realizing that, you know what, it's not that nice either. You've been just as bad. Cindy says, is your life ruled by what everybody thinks? Well, it shouldn't be. I think that's a statement, Cindy. I think maybe you're saying, you know, that's a problem by allowing others. And that is, it starts in kindergarten. I saw it with my boys, where they'll come home and they will be affected by playing with little kids, and they'll come home and they will want to be like all the other kids. They will want these things and those toys and that peer pressure group. And it just grows all the way through school. You get in the workplace, and then everybody is doing something, going for a beer after work or going and playing golf or doing something, and you just get caught up in that. And I think religiously it happens as well. People just get caught up in it, and they're not thinking for themselves, and they're being ruled really by what other people think about you or your desire to fit in so much. You've actually given yourself over to being ruled by what other.
I think it has a lot to do with society standards and the culture.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they make up these morals, they also make up their own version of hell for you. So it's like, which hell are you going to pick? The one that, like the punishment Jesus will give you, or the punishment man's going to give you, where there is no forgiving at all. Like, there's no forgiving in society. They just want you to be embarrassed. They want to, like, put you in front of the court and shame you. And it's crazy that people don't understand or aren't being taught how Jesus gives you forgive. Like, you can be so horrible, but if you truly repent, like, he'll forgive you. And where man will not.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's sad that people aren't being, like, they can't understand that. But also, like, the rat race, like, they make us do, like this last year, or this last couple of years, it was really hard for us to look at my sister, where she's in this beautiful town where we all kind of, growing up, like, she didn't even grow up where I was, but we grew up in the desert, and everybody would go into this town called Tehachapi, like a little cup in the mountains that was so perfect and like a little paradise. And she got there, and it's like we've been trying to get there for so much, and then I just want, like, the littlest house there, and then to realize, like, I'm using society's success because she goes by, like, she's not super materialistic, but she happens to have, like, everything, and you start feeling the pressure, anxiety, because your parents, who aren't following God, literally think you're not successful if your little sister has all this, but you don't. and you start feeling the crushing anxiety of what the world demands that your success should be. And then when you read the Bible daily and realize that's not, it's the asphalt of heaven. Like, all that's nothing. You can't take that with you at all. And besides, there's so much better. And we're just tents. Like, this is just our temporary tent.
Mm-hmm.
So to be happy with just be content to not have those things. Even if it's the most humblest house, Satan can still use that humble house as temptation. We realized that like 2 trips in California. And this last time we went, I was like, I can't stand it in this town. That used to be like, I need to live there. I can't stand it. Like, it's...
When you're critical, and that people, because we don't want to be criticized, we don't want to be rejected, and so the criticism, and then we turn right around and do it back. About the hypercritical people, I feel sorry for them, I really do, and I'm not being sarcastic about it because they're very miserable.
Yeah.
There's a level of misery that comes with focusing on judging people, talking about people. They're miserable. They're miserable,
bitter.
and you gotta let that go, and just remember that you really be very careful because we have no room to judge for anything. So something's going to rule our lives. Kind of bring this to a wrap up. Something's going to rule your lives. And the way he rolled those up and summarized them was you're going to be ruled by appearance physically, spiritually. You can be ruled by the praise of others and ruled by money and worry, or ruled by a critical spirit. Those are irrational rulers that seem to work their way into our lives, and even if you're a Christian, it's like they keep coming back. Jesus was teaching God's children that should have been following the Mosaic Law, and yet they struggled the most with it, it seems like. The idea about that CO2 poisoning, there was something else about that. Not only does CO2 bind where the oxygen is supposed to bind, but it won't let go. When somebody gets CO2 poisoning, the Spo2 monitor we would put on patients' fingers to see how much oxygen saturation, did you know that it would read above normal? It would read like they're good. You'd put it on their finger, and it would be 110%. Like, wow, you're really good with oxygen. No, they're not. No, it's because it binds, and it's the same shape as the molecule, and the way it refracts light. The measurer, the Spo2 monitor, which you probably have in your homes now, it gave you a false positive.
Oh.
And we had to switch over and look at a different frequency in order to break it down. And the only way you can reduce is either through time, but critically over poisoning through CO2 is a decompression chamber. So if you think about these things that slowly creep in, they can give us that false positive, like that Spo2 monitor. You think you're fine, you're not, and the difficulty to get away from it, the difficulty to separate that CO2 and get it out of your body. So I thought I'm kind of adding that from my medical experience in that, and I thought that's a really good illustration. How subtly and insidious CO2 will sink into your bloodstream and then bind. And then you just slowly stop, and then you sit there. But all the measurements make it look like at Spo2 you're fine, and you're not. These things that are ruling our lives, you may think you're fine. You're not. That's the choice. You have 2 choices. Follow after Jesus, follow after the world's philosophies and stuff. So we're up at 8 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and, if you have more comments you want to add on Facebook, I'll go ahead and respond to them, and we'll include them next week. I hope that you'll join us this Sunday morning at 9:45 for Bible study, 10:45 for worship. And I hope give me some input on what you think about the class. You got some problems, concern, or you want more. So it helps me know what's good and helping us to grow spiritually together. So, well, God bless.